Hello, welcome back to KotlinBytes. My name is Jacob, and today we're going to be talking about loops, specifically for loops and while loops, also do while loops. So let's get right into it. As you can see, I've set up a small project here. We're going to be using a loop to find the max value of an array. One thing to note is that Kotlin already has a max function, so we're basically recreating the wheel here. But the purpose of this video is to show you just what a for loop is and one way that you can use it. I've already created a variable called myNumbers. If you hold Control and then click on it, you can go into the definition. I've defined this variable in a different file. It's just an array of floating point numbers. So our function is going to find the largest floating point number, which I believe would be this guy. Okay, so if we go back, I've already created a function called findMax, and we're going to return a value to it, which is going to be the max number that we'd find, and then we're going to compare that to the max function that Kotlin already has built in, and we'll see if it's equal to it. So that's the plan for today. Let's get into it. FindMax. This is the start of the function that I've created. It has an input parameter of nums, the array of numbers, and we're going to return the float that is the highest, the largest number. Okay, so we're going to begin with a for loop, and a for loop is a loop that iterates or steps through a collection. A collection is a set of values in a container, and so that could be something like a set. It could be a list, an array, and it really is self-explanatory. It's a collection of things. And so an array is a type of collection. And a for loop iterates over them. There's a couple ways to iterate using a for loop. The most common way is to use something called for each. Now you don't actually define for each in this language. You just say for, and then you define your variable, which I'm going to say is n. And then you use this keyword called in, and then you define your collection. So what's happening here is that it's going to execute this block of code for each number in nums. And each time it executes it, it's going to spit out the next value, which will be called n. So really quickly, let me print out the value of n. And just so this compiles, I'm going to return something. We'll return 0 for now. Okay, if we run this, as you can see, it prints out each value that we have in the list or in the array. Okay, so our goal is to find the max value and then return that. One way to approach this is to create a variable called currentMax. We should set this equal to the first value. So we'll say nums.first. That's one way to get the first value. Another way is to use the subscript operator, which allows you to choose which index to pull the values from. In Kotlin, actually in really any programming language, the first element is always defined as 0, and the second one is defined as 1, etc., etc. It should also be noted that there should at least be one element in here. So if there are no elements, we should return 0. There's actually a function here called first or null. And what that means is that it's going to return the first item, but if there is no first item, as in if the array is empty, then it's going to return null. And when it returns null, we're going to use this thing called an Elvis operator, and we're just going to return 0 from this function. So what the Elvis operator means is that the code directly behind it will only be executed if the code in front of it is null. So if first or null returns a value, this code will not be executed. However, if it returns null, it will execute this code, and this code will just simply return 0. Next, we're going to create a condition. If our current max is less than n, then current max is equal to n. And this is fairly simple. We're just, again, looping through each item in nums, and if the current item is greater than our current max, then we just make it the current max. And lastly, we're going to spit out current max, and that's what we'll return. I want to move this print statement inside the condition, and we'll run this. There we go. And also, it seems, obviously, we need to run more tests, but right now it seems to be working with the built-in max function. Let me show you one more thing with for loops. If you're coming from Java, you're probably familiar with indices. And with Kotlin, you can do the same. On any collection, you can say .indices. This is going to return a range. So the values from 0 to however long the collection is. And so n right now becomes an integer, the index for nums. This typically isn't the most useful thing. However, there is another way you can use this, which is this function, well, variable called withIndex. Yeah, it's a function. And what this will do is it's going to return both the index as well as the value. And we can actually unwrap this right here using parentheses. And what you'll notice is that this right here is going to be populated with our index and then our value, which is our number. If I print this out, you can see at which index that value was located in. Okay, and finally, there is a shorthand to all of this. Kotlin comes with a bunch of built-in extension functions. So if you don't want to use the conventional for loop, there is another for loop you can use. And that is, so on any collection, you could say .for each. So you have for each, and then you have for each indexed. Indexed, of course, is, it just includes the index, and that can be very useful, and it's very powerful. We're just going to use for each. By default, there's this invisible variable called it. So we could change n to it, or we could define it explicitly here by saying n and then arrow. So this is called a closure. Right here, this is our closure, and everything before the arrow is where you define your parameters. If you only have one parameter in your closure, just like we saw, we have an implicit it variable, but you could also define it explicitly here. And this will run the same way as before. Alrighty, let's get on to while loops. For our while loop example, we're going to create a function that finds a random number above a particular threshold, and we're going to iterate over the sum of these numbers until we reach that threshold and we surpass it. So really quickly, let me give you an example. In this example here, our threshold is 10 and our spread is 5. So we're going to start with 0. That's where we always begin, and then we increase by a random number between 0 and 5. So maybe our second number is 3. And then we repeat that. Maybe our second number is, again, between 0 and 5, is 4, but then we add 4 to 3, so that becomes 7. Maybe our next number is 1, so this is 8. Next number is 3, and that becomes 11. And then we return this number, because this number is above 10. So yeah, 11 would be returned. The only numbers that can possibly be returned are 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Now, why would you want this function? I don't know, but I'm going to use it to explain a while loop. I'm going to create an instance of the random object. Call it rand. And then we'll create a seed, because random in a computer isn't truly random. And so you have to, well, even when you add a seed, it's not random yet. It's always, it's following a pattern, and adding a seed will help make it a little bit more random. We'll create a variable called our current rand num. We'll start off with 0, and we're going to return that current rand num, of course, at some point. We're then going to create a while loop. So we create a while loop by typing while, and then our condition here is going to be current rand number is less than above. Actually, less than or equal to above, because if it is equal to our threshold, we want it to surpass our threshold. So if it's less than our threshold, we're going to increase this current rand number by some random integer that's between 0 and spread. We can use the plus equals operator to increase our current rand number by some given value. And that some given value is going to be rand dot next int, and we're going to use this function right here called next int from and until. That's going to be from 0, actually just until, so spread. So this is going to generate a random integer between 0 and spread. Spread is just some number, it's our range. Okay, and then we're going to return current rand num. I'm going to print out the values here. So current rand num. Okay, let's run this. Starts off as 0, then our first random number is 2, and then 6, 9, 10, and then I had to run it once more to finally receive 11. And this is printed out above here, final value. And if we run it again, it should be different. Yep, well, our final value is the same. Run it once more. Wow, still 11. Okay, now it's 13. So as you can see, it was 0 for the first couple iterations. And yeah, so the while loop will continue to run until the condition inside of its parentheses is equal to false. So as long as it's true, it's going to run it. Another way to accomplish this is to use a do while. A do while executes the code inside here before checking the condition. A do while might actually be more useful in our situation. So I'm going to cut this code, paste it at the end, and then add the word do in front. And this is essentially doing the exact same thing that we had before, except it first runs the loop at least once before checking the condition. So in certain applications, this does have a different effect, but in our use case, it's the same. Okay, this was an example of both a for loop and a while loop within Kotlin. Hopefully you guys learned something. Leave your comments and questions down below. I will answer them. Thanks you guys for watching. Have a great day.